here is somebody talking about somebody he's never heard of and saying that she's a Republican, and he's delighted. And he goes home, he toddles off wherever it is, and his people tell him something, and he puts it in Truth Social, and he couldn't define woke if he tried.
What is woke advertising, and is it, as President Trump thinks, bad for business? This is the unlikely culture war of the week, sparked by an advert for jeans starring the actress Sydney Sweeney.
Genes are passed down from parents to offspring, often determining traits like hair color, personality, and even eye color. My genes are blue.
Well, that's Sydney Sweeney in the advert that some people claimed was a racist dog whistle. Donald Trump is a big fan. Here he is discovering how she votes.
She's a registered Republican? Oh, now I love her ad. Is that right? Is Sydney Sweeney? You'd be surprised at how many people are Republicans. That's what I wouldn't have known, but I'm glad you told me that. If Sydney Sweeney is a registered Republican, I think her ad is fantastic. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Donald Trump then took to Truth Social to say being woke is for losers, and Sydney Sweeney has the hottest, caps lock, the hottest ad out there. We're going to talk about whether wokeness sells or the reverse with the chief executive of the Advertising Association Steve Woodford and the author, broadcaster, social commentator Peter York. He's also a specialist in brand rehabilitation. So first of all, I better start with you, Peter. Is Donald Trump right when he says the tide has turned against woke advertising?
Donald Trump literally doesn't know what he's talking about, and you can see he doesn't actually know who Miss Sweeney is when he's asked about it. What's happened is that Donald Trump is terribly chippy, and he's chippy about, because he lives in a show business world idea of politics, he very much resents the fact that big celebrities, the biggest names, even now he's conquered everything, the biggest names like Beyonce and Taylor Swift tend not to support him, but to support the Democrats. So here is somebody talking about somebody he's never heard of and saying that she's a Republican, and he's delighted. And he goes home, he toddles off wherever it is, and his people tell him something, and he puts it in Truth Social, and he couldn't define woke if he tried.
Well, I mean, so their company is American Eagle, and they're mostly a sort of a youth fashion brand, and all the fuss seems to have worked. Its share price did shoot up from about $10.70 to $12.80 over the last week. I should add, actually, a year ago, its share price was $24. But Steve Woodford, from an advertising point of view, surely this is just wonderful. Getting an advert to break through like this and be discussed by politicians. That's a dream, isn't it?
Well, I think it depends on what they're discussing about the ad. And there's clearly been a huge amount of discussion in the US, particularly around some of the hidden meanings that people are seeing in the ads about eugenics and so on and so forth, which I cannot believe that the advertiser intended to stoke that sort of social media firestorm. So it depends, I think, in what is being said about the brand. And in the end, it's about the brand. You know, this and one ad is just a step along a road for a brand. You know, what's the long-term effect of this going to be on American Eagle? You pointed out the share price bounce, but their stock is down quite a long way. And I read various articles about this and said, the big test is going to come, when American young people go back to college, back to school, and do they buy American Eagle or do they buy Levi's, which is currently being promoted by Beyonce. So you've got this really interesting celebrity clash between two very big brands, Levi's and American Eagle. And it'll be very interesting to see which one sort of wins when it matters, and that's in the stores.
Yes, I mean there was some debate whether the American Eagle advert was just a bit too old school. It was a bit too much sexualizing the female body. But I noticed, I'm not sure that criticism has been leveled at Beyonce's jean advert, where we get extreme close-ups of her in her pants.
Well, I think the difference between the two, certainly in the commentary that I've read, is that Beyonce it seems to be in control, in a position of power. It's her telling her story in a more authentic way, I think, is generally the view. I think the American Eagle ad is seen as perhaps a bit derivative. It's certainly a throwback to an 80s ad, which featured Brooke Shields, that again, there's some sort of fairly unfavourable comparison with. So I think it's the originality, the confidence, the chutzpah of the Beyonce ad that I think is probably where certainly the media and marketing and advertising critics seem to be giving their vote to that one.
Yes, well, I mean, I must admit, I thought the Beyonce advert was completely derivative of the Nick Cayman Levi's advert, which was also set in a laundrette. Well, let's move on to another. Let's move on to another advert, which got.
Harry, I think that was deliberately the case. It was paying homage to that.
Oh, I see. So one is derivative and one is paying homage. I'm not
very important, very important differences.
Okay, well, let's move on to the Jaguar Land Rover's Copy Nothing campaign, which got a lot of people hot under the collar and was also dragged into a culture war. If you don't remember the uproar, it was an advert that had no cars, but just lots of androgynous people in multicoloured dresses. So, I mean, Peter, do you think this worked? Did this inject a bit of va-va-voom into a sort of previously slightly tired car brand?
I don't think so, but it gained a bit of attention, and you can go on from there. You're not going to repeat that kind of ad constantly, because Jaguar Land Rover products are seriously expensive, and you have to think very seriously about buying them. But, a bit of variety, a bit of, ooh, who's that for, sometimes, does gain attention if you're in a tired market.
And in terms of the culture wars, do you think you can win over a whole new customer base by just trying to, because what made the Jaguar Land Rover advert interesting was it was sort of a potpourri of different sort of genders, sexualities, races. Does that work if you're just trying to appeal to a kind of a mix of everyone rather than a target market?
You're not aiming at those markets. Those people aren't going to buy Jaguars and Land Rovers. It's a considerably older cohort and considerably more careful cohort. But it makes you notice, it makes you ask that, it makes you surprised that brand could be saying any of those things or could be aware of any of those things. People are interested in Jaguar Land Rover, but you have to revive it a bit. It's rather like Burberry, which overdid it being groovy. People want Burberry to be bourgeois, It's an aspirational brand, not a groovy one. And they seriously overdid it in terms of the presentation, the advertising, and the actual products for a while, or the products they chose to show. And now they've gone back to being bourgeois,
yes,
which is right.
Yes, and I see that the chief executive last week has moved on to another, he's taken early retirement. Stephen, the interesting thing is how adverts have got dragged into culture wars. There seems to be a moderately new idea. The one that seems to have possibly started it all was Bud Light, for long the choice of beer for Americans' working classes, and they never really recovered from a rebranding campaign a couple of years ago, fronted by transgender TikTok star Dylan Mulvaney. Stephen, again, is it possible to have a successful advert where you alienate half the population, but you might win over some other people in the process?
Well, I don't think alienating any of the population is a particularly good idea, particularly for a mainstream brand and a mass market brand like Bud Light. But I think there's a wider point here, which I think is a really interesting one, which is when you look back at a huge breadth of brand campaigns around the world, you see that the more inclusive the advertising, the better it performs for businesses. There's an amazing study done by something called the Unstereotype Alliance, which is a organisation that looks around the world, and they've looked at 400 campaigns from about 60 countries, and basically concluded that the more inclusive the advertising is, i.e. the more it represents the customers that you're trying to serve, the better it performs. And I think that's a really important consideration, if you like, in the round rather than picking up on two or three high-profile cases.
Is that really, sorry, Stephen, is that really a good definition of inclusive? Because if you're trying to win over the customers you serve, Bud Light's customers are the white working class Americans in rural constituencies in, Wyoming and Colorado. And there
that's why I would say that, that if you pick an individual ad and that you can't make a general point from it, there's a great phrase using, hard cases make bad law. I don't think that's an extreme case of probably a poor choice that was made there. But in general, more inclusive advertising, more advertising that looks more like the public it's serving, performs better across markets, across brands. So I don't think you can make a general point from one particularly high-profile campaign.
Okay, but do you think we will see a bit less of advertising that is so-called woke? These sort of Jaguar, these sort of the Bud Light advertising that has got people upset.
I think you'll see advertising reflecting more and more the population that it serves. We know from research that we do on trust in advertising that it's an incredibly important driver of trust. To see, in effect, to see the people who people like to see themselves in the ads, or people who are like them in the ads. So I think we'll see more of that. We'll probably see less, if you like, of the big statement type, high risk moves like that Bud Light campaign. And I think Peter, just I want to echo what Peter was saying. I think the Jaguar campaign, for all its criticism, it was a reset for that brand. And actually, when you look at the cars that they're bringing out, they are very, very bold, and the concept cars they're showing are a completely step change in terms of the way the brand is going to look and feel. And these are going to be very expensive cars. The acid test will be the cars.
Yes,
people will remember those ads. But it was a moment to say that we're changing. And then the proof is going to be in the pudding of how the cars look and perform when they're launched.
And Peter York, I wonder if I could bring you back in for a final thought on whether this is actually a new golden age for advertising, because I think there was a fear that now no one sits down to watch the same TV programmes or goes past the same billboards anymore, that advertising has become irrelevant. If we're now all talking about it and it's making the front of newspapers as news stories, is this good news for the advertising world?
Well, there is a systematic method whereby you pump an ad by trying to create a controversy. The real test is the copywriter, the guy who filched, to some extent, mustn't say that, the stuff from the Brooke Shields ad, they're terribly similar. The guy who actually wrote the things that Sydney Sweeney said, did he have these thoughts, or he was just doing an old-fashioned advertising thing, a homophone to jeans and jeans? That's a classic bit of advertising thing which could have happened any time over the last 100 years. And the final thought is, we're not like them, meaning Brits aren't like Americans. Brits aren't so scared of this stuff. And it's not as controversial here as it is there.
Well, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, Peter. That was Peter York, the author, broadcaster, social commentator, and also we heard from Stephen Woodford, the Chief Executive of the Advertising Association.